All right, guys. So this is our final pour on our walnut or white walnut kitchen island top that we did. So we did this a little unconventional. Instead of planing this after we poured it, we actually poured more clear on top of it. And what that did was actually give us more depth. It's almost like looking into like a crystal ball or something. It's got kind of a globe appearance to it. Makes everything look really deep. So we've already mixed up our epoxy. We're going to pour that on there, and you're going to see this thing come to life in like 2 seconds because it's really cloudy right now from the sanding. We sanded it with 220 grit, and let me see that paper towel over there. Make sure everything wiped off. Oops, the trowel.
Got limited space.
Not too bad though.
Yeah.
So, and what we did was, after we got out of the mold, we cut our edges with a track saw, so they're super straight, and we rounded the tops and bottoms. The tops rounded with a 1/4 inch round over bit, and then the 1/8 inch round over bit on the bottom, so the epoxy can flow over nice. And then we're gonna wipe those, wipe the nipples off.
Excess,
The
yeah.
nipples off. The nubs
The drops
on the
at the
bottom.
bottom.
I'm gonna wipe them off afterwards. I actually saw a trick somebody did. They had the epoxy sitting in the bowl, and you get these air bubbles, and they like pre-popped some bubbles. I thought that was pretty cool, so I'm gonna try it. All right.
So we're gonna go ahead and start the clock for 45 minutes because that's
About time.
Yeah, that's a time needed or allowed for working with epoxy. After that, it starts getting a little bit harder to work with because it's starting to harden up.
Let that one dribble.
You just stick it there.
Yeah, I usually leave myself a little room. There we go.
There.
Let it flow out of there. All right, so we're using this. It's a 1/8 notched out trowel. This actually is from Stone Coat. But you just take that and start moving your product around. And then, like I said, you guys are going to start seeing that black come out and that walnut underneath there just start appearing out of the thin air. It's really cool. We did a few pours on this seal coats. I mean, we did a couple seal coats, probably about 4, I think, to try and get this thing sealed up. We were worried about the air getting into the really deep, clear epoxy pour. So those seal coats, well, you know, it took time, but the seal coat's not as bad. It only takes about 3 hours to dry and set up, and then you could, you know, sand it down and do some more afterwards. But we, you know, we're working people, so we usually just let it sit for the night, and then after work, come back and do it again. All right, there. So you got a nice little set of epoxy there, already ready to be spread out. You always want to work in the middle of your project, and then work it out to the sides, and do the edges last, as far as letting it pour over. So that way you're not having too much pour over the side. We did 3 ounces per square foot, as is recommended. So you get a nice coverage, but you don't waste too much product. The reason this is notched is it just gives you a measured amount over the side. Come around, work over there. This room is small, but it's actually better than the little apartment room we were doing it in before, so still an upgrade. See, it's starting to get over the side now. It's trying to wait until the end, but got a little bit tripping over. So I guess I'm just gonna have epoxy shoes for a little bit. That's not a big deal. How high is it in here right now, Brittany?
72 degrees.
72 degrees in this tiny room. So it's perfect temperature for epoxy. It's a little warm for us.
And why does it have to be warmer for the epoxy?
So it has to be room temperature because it helps with the curing process. Anything above 70 is good. Honestly, I don't know if there's rules to it, but I would think like a hotter room, if it gets into like 80, 90 degrees, I don't know if it cures faster or not. You know.
You just don't want it to be too cold when you pour
Yeah,
it.
you don't want it to be anything below what would be standard room temperature, like 70, 68, 70 degrees. Because that your epoxy should be at least room temperature before you mix it. Because it will not flow good, number one. Like this is flowing really nice because it's room temperature already. There we go. Now let's let it drip over the edge a little bit there.
Yeah, you're gonna.
That's good. We got this propped up off the table with just some little strips of melamine. You can use anything really. Just want to be flat wood. That way you know it's actually sitting on a flat surface. This table is level when we build it, so we know it's already a level surface. So if you put it on a 2x4 or two 2x4s that are not even, and you don't have a level surface, then you're going to have an issue with your epoxy setting up level because it is a self-leveling product. You know, it'll level out, but if it's tilted too much, then you're going to come over tomorrow and you got all these runs over here, and you might even have a dry spot on the one end. That would be bad. So don't do that. Just finishing this up, getting any of the stuff that's too thick out of the center. Okay, I'm ready to do some chopping. Sit there. I'll move some of this stuff out of the way here. Just we're not getting too loaded up with junk here. Alright, so this is our chop brush. Definitely don't want a low quality brush for this. You want to try and limit as many little bristles you might get in the top, and better quality brush you get. I mean, you don't have to buy the most expensive brushes, but it is better to get the little handle ones because all you're doing is chopping. You don't need a lot of brush to do that. Always prime your brush a little bit so that way you're not pulling epoxy off and moving it somewhere else.
And why do we chop the epoxy?
So the chopping action is going to do a couple things. One is the first thing is breaking surface tension. So any tension that's on the surface where the epoxy may not be sitting yet, it's going to break that tension and let that epoxy sit on it. Otherwise you might get those little fish eyes and where one spot where it's not done. It also is going to eliminate any trowel marks. I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but there's little trowel marks here from where I was just spreading. So this chopping action is going to break those up, and because it's self-leveling, it's going to even back out. And if you were doing color too, or the color pour, this could also spread your colors around and mix them up and make them a little less factory looking, maybe a little bit more natural. So it's just clear, so we're just doing the surface tension and getting rid of the trowel marks. You want to chop over there? Yeah, see, that's right there. So just do like a little sweeping pattern, like you're mowing the grass. Pretty much is how it is. You just keep moving down the surface so you know you hit every spot.
Back on your side.
Yeah. Now you do that last row there. There you go. When you do it, instead of going straight down, if you arc that angle a little bit, it spreads it out. See how it cushions it? Like instead of going straight down where it's playing, it kind of spreads it a little better.
Good to know. It also looks like it helps move the epoxy a little bit too, so that way your edges get covered.
It promotes movement.
Now it looks like it brings those bubbles to the surface, so it's easier to get out of the project.
Some of those bigger ones, the stubborn ones, yeah. Just move along here and do these edges real quick. Just a nice light. That round over cut is awesome on there.
Yeah.
Just really set this off. It makes it look like it's, I don't know, it was made not made in a garage anyways.
Right, very natural looking.
It's like a machine finish.
Mm-hmm.
Put a brush in there. Go through a lot of materials. That's the only downside about epoxy is that you do have a lot of waste, and there's not really a lot you can do to change it. Like this trowel here, you did a bunch of uses out of that. Obviously, it's going to dry, and then you just peel it off. But brushes you go through, buckets you go through.
Trowels sometimes.
I mean, you might be able to reuse buckets after they dry, but I wouldn't, just because if you're pouring and a piece of little chunk of epoxy goes into your deep pour, you may not see it, and then you come back the next day and it may have floated, and then you've got a piece of plastic inside your epoxy that's always going to be there. Unless you draw it out. Always try and give things a little light, just in case there's any crap sitting on it. I'm just going to go through here.
So what are you doing there with the blow torch?
This is popping the bubbles. Any bubbles that are on the surface, it's going to promote them to pop because the heat's going over them. It's also helping the epoxy move a little bit too, so it'll start its self-leveling effect.
It's always fun to play with the blow torch.
Always fun. I'll do this 3 times. So this is our first pass. We'll wait about 5 minutes or so, and then do another one, just to give those bubbles a chance to come up to the surface a little bit more. Look at that, 74 here. Oh, too hot. I'm going to wait to the end to torch the edges.
Is that a hair in there?
Where's that? You see one? We can get it out now. I mean, time. I'll give it a little bit. I'm going to turn down the heat.
About the one.
It is good to inspect your project. You know, the more stuff you can get out, the better. And it's not a clean room by any means. We don't have like a ventilation system getting all the dust out of here, but it's definitely better than if you were doing it in the garage where we've been sanding for the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, sometimes you'll get hair, just specks of anything, comes off your clothes, goes into the epoxy.
And it's not a huge deal with lint and things like that. What you're really looking for is bugs, uh, you know, fibers from the brushes, your hair, things like that. Like it's gonna
Brush hair or brush bristles.
because we can go back over this with some higher grit sandpaper when we're done. Start with like a 400 grit and work our way up to 3000, and it'll be completely polished. But we'll be able to get any things that's sticking up like over the surface of the epoxy. It'll stick out a little bit, and you just nick it right off. But yeah, so we still got bubbles in here. They're little baby micro ones. Nothing crazy though, so that's good. That edge is just incredible looking though. Honestly, it's just that cut. It actually refracts light. You can see this line.
I noticed that.
You see the line? So that's the light hitting that curve.
That's cool.
And it's causing depth.
Is there something in there? Is that a bubble? In the black. Right here. In that area.
Oh, that's just a bubble.
Just a bubble?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been about
30 minutes.
3 minutes. That's good. We'll go through and do another torch run here.
Or it's been 15. You got 30 minutes left to work with epoxy.
Yeah, look at all those little micro bubbles starting to. You can see them. Like the big bubbles pop, but you get like these little hazy bubbles on the surface. That's why you do this just like 3 times or 4 if you need to, but.
Another thing too is to kind of go along your sides and kind of even out the epoxy because it's just kind of dripping, so you'll see those drip marks. Usually you can just run your hand or the brush over it to even that out. You can always press underneath as well to get those excess, those nipples that was referred to earlier. So that way you don't have to sand as much later on. That's pretty good.
This was our first deep cast pour. You know, we've done a few countertops now, a couple of giant slabs, big 10-foot slabs. You know, the work is not even pouring. The work is the woodwork. You know, getting them prepped where they're going to not leak epoxy through themselves, through crevices or voids. Getting them sanded down, getting them planed. You know, that's the real work behind it. This is easy when you do if you're just pouring it on a slab. You know. But,
Yeah. And this pretty much this black part here is that deep cast. It's pouring amongst the wood there. So it's instead of just pouring on top, it's pouring in between along the sides.
as soon as we got this light on top, we can turn it off. Then we can kind of run our eyes down the surface, and it's almost like when you're looking at water, then you can see like something floating on the water. Just a little stubborn spot right there. Those are things in there.
Things in there. Okay.
Just little pieces of lint. Like I said, we plan to polish this because it's going to be in the house, and it's right in the kitchen. That's the center point of any house. So if you have something in there, you know, people, you know, that's a real thing.
Yeah, that's
That's a gnat or something.
bug.
What is that? I don't know what that is. Actually, this is a little piece of lint, I think. But like I said, you're gonna get stuff like that, especially when I'm working so close to it. But once you do your final sweep with the heat, you know, if there is some stuff tomorrow when you walk in, you don't get devastated by it. It's something that's gonna be sanded out if you want to do that. And we're gonna do it. So, but you don't have to. I mean, things like I don't know if you're doing like a countertop and you've got a bunch of different colors, sometimes you can't see it. This is in the center of a room, so you're going to be able to look at it from every angle. So there's some things that aren't going to be able to hide, as opposed to a countertop, which is up against a wall. You're only going to ever see it from one angle. So some things might be hidden. But I think we're ready for our last one here.
And one important thing is that you have 45 minutes to work with this stuff.
Yeah, there's no rush. I mean, that's
don't
why
rush it.
We're just standing here talking right now because, when we first started doing this, it felt like we were constantly like, oh gosh, we gotta get it done.
Right.
We were also using different products. Like we were using a Famo wood one, which you have 15 minutes to spread it, pop the bubbles. I mean, it's almost unimaginably short when you have a huge project like this. It doesn't seem like it's that big, but when you're looking at a surface, like just a square inch of this, it's like you're looking at it for 5 minutes trying to figure out if there's any problems and trying to fix them. And then you're not even seeing what's happening down here. So giving that extra time definitely helps out a lot.
And then what product do we use, honey?
This is our friends over at Stone Coat Countertops. Great guys. They got free information on their websites. You can go on there and watch their training videos. You can learn everything we learned. I mean, it's not like we went to school for this or
Nope.
just watched him on the internet a few times and fell in love with it. It's really an art form more than anything else because it takes a lot of passion to get out there and do it over and over again. Most people want a product done. They want, all right, I just want some countertops. I'm gonna go to Lowe's and buy them or whatever. But you just gotta have a passion for it. Thanks.
Might want to check that spot where you were. You did touch it with your leg, so.
Oh, it's the sides.
Okay.
So I'm waiting till the end to pop the bubbles on the side because there's bubbles, but we don't want to move the epoxy too much until really the end. Where are we at on time?
23.
23 minutes. That's good. I think it's going to be our last.
A little bit about halfway there.
I'm going to go a little slower on this last one since it's going to be last time. This stuff is not flammable. So, I mean, if you hold the torch here, it'll start to maybe steam a little bit, but it's not going to catch on fire. You don't have to worry about that.
But you want to keep it moving because the longer you hold it, you're spreading the epoxy out and it will be uneven.
Yeah, especially when you get close to the window where it's going to be starting to set up. Like even we've had a problem where we were doing a countertop and we were getting a little too, you can easily get into it too much where you just want to keep touching it because you're like, oh, I just this one spot, we can move this color over here. And that's the fun of it because you just get to move the color around. But when you're holding there with the heat gun for too long after that window closes, you're going to have a little bit of a fisheye, kind of like a spot where it dipped in and it didn't flow back into itself because it was starting to set up. You just got to be careful with that. But if you're doing this kind of stuff and you still got 20 minutes left before it even starts to set up, you're fine. It's not going to hurt at all. There's those stubborn ones that keep popping up on this edge though, driving me nuts.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just like little lint spots. I just want to get as many out as I can.
Yeah. I mean that's
because
why
if we come out here tomorrow and it's spotless, maybe we won't sand it. But I do have some new polishing products I wanted to try, so I'm probably gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of why we do so many of those quick coats, those fill coats, so that way, because wood is porous, so air is escaping through the wood. which is creating those bubbles. So that's why you do so many coats, so that way you do your final pour. Fingers crossed, you don't have to deal with as many.
Right. Yeah, we learned that on a nice walnut slab that they kept us guessing because we weren't doing enough seal coats, and we got air coming up through it constantly. Even now, I'm still like touching one spot. And if you do get, like in this part of the process, if you're at like 20 minutes, where you've got 20 minutes left or so, and you start, if you see like a spot that's not filling in for some reason from when we broke the surface tension, you can touch it with your finger and just like swirl it around, and then heat it, and it'll start to even itself out. I don't know, Dave. I think we should probably just leave it alone, honestly, because it's all popped. If you can look around the sides real quick, just to kind of walk down, because I think I got all the sides pretty good.
Yeah, they look pretty good on this side.
Okay.
So yeah, and plus the more you move around, the more your
air calls and dust, and this room does have a vent system, but we have a filter in it to try and limit any dust falling into it. But it's just a filter you bought from Walmart. It's not some HEPA hospital grade filter that's going to keep everything except air coming through it. So
CDC.
yeah, it's not CDC approved. Yeah, see, like I'm just hitting this spot real quick to see if there was any air bubbles popping, and there's none. So I don't think I need to do one more sweep, but I'm going to just to good measure.
It's always a good idea to take a step back, because when you're on top of it the whole time, you're not seeing everything from a step back perspective. So make sure you do that before you call it quits, so that way you see anything, you can handle it before it dries.
Especially when you're doing color. Found that out too. If you're like right on top of it, you're like, this looks awesome. But when you look back and you've got all this color over here, you might be heavier in some areas, or you might not even have put a certain color somewhere. And that's what she meant by stepping back and looking at it. You just gotta reevaluate it.
Those are more with like your countertops, the countertops that have that marble look, or the granite, where you kind of play with a bunch of different colors, so that way it looks like stone.
That's our sign to stop, huh?
I think that might be the sign of.
We're out of juice, so I think that we're gonna leave this guy alone now. It looked really good, and
we'll show you the final product, and fingers crossed everything works well.
Bye, guys.